a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, it's great to see so many of you here, and I hope you're all having a fantastic morning, and it will continue because I do have a great lecturer about to give you a wonderful presentation, and today we're talking about capturing moments in time, which is obviously very important on a cruise like this because we will see some absolutely phenomenal sights over the next couple of days there. So I'll leave you with an expert. It is, of course, your amazing guest lecturer, Steve Noble.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Well, over the course of the next couple weeks, we're going to have the opportunity to explore a number of different photographic skills. And the objective is to help you all be better photographers, better artists, to capture the things that you see and to do it in such a way that you're happy with the end results. We're going to talk about common things like composition and working with light, travel photography, obviously very important, HDR photography. Who knows what HDR photography is? Any hands out there? Oh, a number of you. Okay. High dynamic range, thank you. And creating panoramas. When we see these beautiful vistas, it's really a wonderful ability that you all will possess with your equipment to create those panoramas. We're going to talk about your camera and your camera functions. There are basic elements to cameras that we all should have a general grasp of that knowledge. Things like shutter speed. What does that do to the effect of the image and the aperture and ISO and many of these other components? If any of these are strange or foreign to you right now, I assure you by the end of this cruise, you are going to master them. You will understand them. We will put it in simple, understandable terms so that you are comfortable. Now, my lectures are very interactive. Interactive meaning I want you to participate. If you have a question, that question is very likely on the mind of someone else in the audience, and so I encourage you to raise your hand, get my attention, shout out Steve, whatever it takes to get my attention and ask that question as it comes up. That's okay to do. We are going to have a Photoshop workshop, maybe around the fourth lecture on this cruise. And in that Photoshop workshop, you and I collectively as a group, we're going to create some art. We're going to explore some of the wonderful magic that exists in Photoshop, the ability to fix images that are overexposed or underexposed and sharpen images and remove things from photos that you don't want in there. These are very, very handy tools. We're going to talk a lot about equipment and gear. We're going to bring knowledge about some of the new technologies, drone photography, for example, something that I find is extraordinarily beneficial to photographers. We're going to have a photo critique during the cruise. This means that you will have the opportunity to submit your photos, that's maybe too strong of a word, to bring your photos in. We'll put them up on the screen, and together as a group, we're going to look at those photos and say, this is good, this could be improved, and we're just going to discuss various components of the composition and the exposure to hopefully provide some ideas that will help you understand how to improve what you're doing. Creativity equals control. What are some of the elements that when you're taking a picture are in your control? You're going to have to probably shout it out for me to hear you. Angles, did you say? Thank you. Composition, yes. From what direction am I going to take that photo? What else? Zoom, yes. Do I want, if my camera or my lens has the ability to zoom in on a scene, this again is going to go to composition. If there are elements that we want to essentially crop out of our initial image, if we perhaps zoom in on that, that might be beneficial. Or if it's a landscape, we might want to zoom out to capture the majesty of that landscape. Your camera has an automatic setting, and I must admit that many of these automatic settings are really pretty good, and you can use them the vast majority of the time. But when your camera is set to automatic, who has creative control of that photo? Your camera does, exactly right. And when you learn a little bit more about what's happening in the image that you're viewing, you're going to be able to say, I want to do this, and this might have an effect on the image. So here we see a photograph. Anybody know where this location is? Mykonos, exactly right. Now, what could be improved in this image? Say again, sir? She could be more lighted up. She's a little bit underexposed in this image. Now, this happens to be a tourist. I don't know who this young lady is. Who else has an observation? Get rid of them? Yeah. How could we get rid of those people? Well, we can't tell them to move out of the scene, but you're going to encounter this how many times when you finally get to that wonderful spot, you see that wonderful image you want to capture, and then there's just a whole bunch of tourists in the photo. What else do you notice about this image that could be improved? Okay, so what's the focus? What's the composition of this image? And that's a good thing to keep in mind when we're talking about photography. One of the things that I noticed is that the sunset here is overexposed. We have kind of half of a ship in the photo. We have all these confusing elements in the foreground, and it detracts from the image. What would happen if we as photographers elected to let in a little bit less light into this image? Does anybody know? Yes, I heard someone say yes out there. Oh. Thank you, sir. That is exactly right. If we elected, and we knew in our minds that if I decide to let in a little bit less light into this image, maybe one or two stops, and I'll explain what that means as we go forward, we will silhouette the foreground, and we will in fact provide a more accurate exposure to the sunset. So here is the same shot, maybe 1 or 2 minutes later, and that's a lot more pleasing, yes? So now our composition, I think, makes sense. I don't want to have the windmill in the center of my screen. That's not good. But to have this as a framing element to pull our attention into the sunset and this ship that happened to be cruising by, and now this is a much more pleasing scene. Film is our canvas, and we paint with light. I love this quotation. This is an image in my hometown, and it was early in the morning. The sun had just risen, and I positioned myself so that the tree in front of me was directly in front of the sun. And what that did is it caused the rays of the sun to appear to shoot out through all the branches of that tree. Now, had I moved just 2 feet this direction or 2 feet that direction, this effect would not have been realized. Does this image look similar? It's the same location. It's the same tree, but it's shot at a different time. This is a time where the fog was so thick that the sun couldn't penetrate it at all. To me, this is still a very interesting photo. I like all the snow on the ground, and I like the misty, almost translucent quality of the tree in the background there. This is almost the identical spot. In fact, I was surprised because I took this image maybe 4 or 5 months after I took the prior one. And I was standing, as you can see, almost in exactly the same spot. So I wanted to compose the image so that the stream was flowing into the viewer, and we kind of frame that tree on the left-hand side again. So what we see in this image is the sun is just about to rise, and we have these golden and yellow and fuchsia and pink colors in the sky, and these colors are now reflected in our stream, and it makes for a very interesting photo. So 2 images taken months and months apart, very, very different feel and impact. And the difference is the lighting conditions and what the photographer elects to do with those images. This is a photo of a gentleman in Egypt, and he invited me into his home, and we had a cup of tea, and I asked him if I could take his photo, because he was a very interesting gentleman to me. And I had the choice of taking a flash photo, right? I was inside his home. I could have popped up my flash and taken a shot, and it would have looked like a college shot. And that would not have been pleasing. It would not have been authentic, and I wanted this to be authentic. So I elected to use natural light, which means I needed to hold my camera pretty still because the light was fairly low, which means my shutter speed was somewhat slow. And I had the light coming in from the window, illuminating one side of his face while silhouetting pretty much the other side of his face, and it makes for a much more pleasing and authentic photo. I like to use photography to illustrate different photographic techniques. And this is, I used to teach a class in my hometown called Eagles in Agriculture. And once a year, there is a birthing season in the cattle area that I live in, and a number of young cows don't survive. And eagles come as far away as Alaska to come down and partake in the potential meals that are available. And so what we see in this image is a mature bald eagle, his wings back in full attack mode, his talons are outstretched, and he's putting in his place a juvenile bald eagle. He has yet to come into color there. And there was a dance that ensued during this encounter. When I say a dance, I mean that there were a number of photos that I took, and it's important. I'm going to use this as an illustration in a moment here, but it's important to know when you get to a scene, what are the things you need to think about to be able to capture that scene the way that you want to capture it. So here I am. This is a few years ago. My hair was black. And what are some of the things, if you were out there and you knew that there was a cow that was now a small baby cow that was deceased on the ground, and you knew that the eagles were going to come in and there might be some excitement, how would you prepare your camera to capture that scene? Any ideas? You're going to have to shout these out. I can barely hear you. What was the answer? High shutter speed. Thank you, sir. That is 100% right. In fact, that's probably the most important thing in my mind in this scene was I needed to freeze the motion. I knew that he's coming in at a very high rate of speed. This exposure was 1/2000th of a second, and so that was fast enough to freeze that motion. And there are many other things that go into making a photo like this, and then this is part of the sequence. One of the other things is something in your camera called frame rate. Now, frame rate means when you depress the shutter, how many pictures are going to be taken as that shutter is depressed. So on the camera that I had at that time, it took 11 frames in 1 second. So I was able to, okay, here's my scene. When something happens, I'm going to be able to depress the shutter, and it's going to take a bunch of shots, and you hope to capture that moment. This is actually the best moment, obviously, but you hope to capture these moments that you could not, click forward, click. It's just happening too fast. And so here's the mature eagle claiming his prize. And I like to do a lot of sequential photography. You'll see that throughout my presentations. All right, here's a trivia question. Does anybody know what a group of eagles is called? A group of cows is called a herd. What's a group of eagles called? An eyrie? I've heard that. I wonder if that's one of them. Let me check my notes here and see if that's one of the ones. Actually, I don't have that in my notes, but the word that I have is a convocation of eagles. Go figure. Who knows? Here's a good example of just being in the right place at the right time. I'm on the Giza Plateau. These are the Great Pyramids of Egypt. The sun is streaming through openings in the cloud. A ray is illuminating the top of the Great Pyramid, turning it kind of a crimson orange, and obviously seconds later, this image was gone. All right, so here's another what could be better photo. Well, who first knows where this is? Trevi Fountain, Rome, yep. So if we could wave a magic wand and make this photo better, what are some of the things you'd like to see changed? Get the people out. That's the first thing that everybody notices. Very distracting. What else? Ma'am? Thank you. That's a good observation. The arch at the top is actually cut off. Not a great composition. What else? Make it wider, yeah. Encompass a little bit more of the image. We could certainly do that. A couple of the things that I noticed was that the horizon here is not perfectly level. Notice that if you look at the whatever those are called, colonnades or something on the left, they're not at the same level as on the right. And also the lighting, the time of day. This is a very harsh afternoon, bright, glaring light, not very pleasing. Okay, here's the same Trevi Fountain. Now there's no people. Why? Because it was 3 a.m. in the morning. I had just flown in. I was still on West Coast United States time. I was wide awake. I went out in the middle of the night and did some photography. And so now I was able to photograph this scene in the way that I wanted. I was able to include the entirety of the dome. I was able to create the composition that I wanted. And if you'll notice that the water kind of has a soft, smooth, flowing look to it, that's because I used a very low shutter speed, slow shutter speed. Sir? I absolutely did use a tripod on that shot. Almost a critical element anytime you're taking a long exposure. If your camera is not on a rock solid, stable environment, then that image might very well be blurry. Okay, moments in time. Many moments in time, as captured by photography, are immortalized and burned into our collective consciousness. Can anybody tell me what this photo represents? Yeah, it was the end of World War II. This is 1945. And this sailor did not know this woman. And he grabbed her and he gave her a big kiss. And she was interviewed afterwards, and she had nothing she could do about it. It just kind of happened. It's not a mystery why they call him Air Jordan. Quite an amazing athlete. And again, photography immortalizes moments in time And this is, I think, a good one. This is an interesting image. This is a shot taken in 1937, and these fellows are dangling their feet over 1,000 feet above the pavement below, and they seem to have not a care in the world. And my knuckles would be white, and both my limbs would be hugging that girder, but they are certainly accustomed to that. This is an image I've seen when I was a child. All right. We all kind of probably remember this. Anybody know the name of the album? Abbey Road. Very good. Yeah, this was, I think, 1965. EMI Studios. This is probably their most famous shot. All kinds of rumors that, remember, Paul was dead because he was barefoot. All kinds of crazy mythology that goes along with some of these photos. What's this? The Hindenburg, exactly right. An iconic image, an image frozen in time. Now, so far we've talked about just photography, and photography being a still photo. If we take a number of still photos and we view them in rapid succession, it becomes a video. And so a video is really a bunch of still photos seen at commonly 24 frames per second. Now, I have a video to show you, but I want your permission before I actually show it to you. It's a video, short video of the Hindenburg disaster, and it's accompanied by a live commentary from a reporter who was on scene who witnessed this event. It can be a little bit heart-wrenching, so does anyone object? Is there any problem? Okay, I don't see any hands raised. Let's go ahead and give this a try.
It's starting to rain again. The rain had cracked up a little bit. The back motors of the ship are just holding it just enough to keep it from... It bursts into flames. Get it started, get it started. It's fighting, and it's crashing. It's crashing terrible. Oh my, get out of the way, please. It's burning, bursting into flames, and it's falling on the mooring mast and all the folks between it. This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, it's like 400 or 500 feet into the sky, and it's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. The smoke and the flames now, and the frame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. All the humanity and all the passengers screaming around it. I told you, I can't even talk to people. There's friends around there. I can't talk, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, pretty moving footage. When you combine photography, videos with commentary, it becomes a very, very powerful medium. Yes, sir. Yes, yes. Could everybody hear the comment? Okay, let me repeat it, because I think it was a really good one. That there was he noticed a gentleman who had a camera on a tripod in that video, and he was running across the field there, and he was in the wrong place. And he was saying that it's super important to be able to be in the right place and to see in advance what you're trying to capture. No one obviously could have anticipated the tragedy that occurred, but the moral of the story is that we need to think ahead of time to be in the right place to view whatever it is we're trying to capture. Now, I put this image up here not because it's an iconic image, but it is a smiling goby. And I shot this in the Red Sea, and I put it up there because the other image was moving, just to make us happy. All right. Many of you recognize this image. It was a young girl shot in, I believe it was Afghanistan. Yes, Afghan girl. And it appeared on the cover of National Geographic magazine in 1985. And this girl was 12 years old at the time. And she had absolutely no clue that her image had become this iconic image all around the world. And some 20 years later, the photographer tracked this young woman down, who's now an older woman, and showed her the image, and it was, I'm sure, quite an eye-opener for her. Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston, 1965. No one thought that this young, brash boxer had a chance. And this is considered one of the greatest sports photos of all time.
Come here, I'm the greatest thing that ever lived. No. I don't have a mark on my face, and I upset Sonny Liston, and I just turned 22 years old. I must be the greatest. I told the world, I am the king of the world. Hold it. I'm pretty. Hold it, you're not that pretty. I'm a bad man. Wait. I shook up the world. I shook up the world.
I was like 8 years old when this all happened, and these images have a very powerful impact on my memories. Midway, top of Mount Suribachi, the end. Iwo Jima, thank you, Iwo Jima. But it is Mount Suribachi, yes? Yes. Thank you for that. And yes, this was February 23rd, 1945, an iconic image. This actually was a staged shot because they missed the original, and so they recreated it, but it's still nonetheless an amazing shot. Now, every photo kind of tells a story. What story is this photo telling us? Get a bigger boat. If this shark had a thought bubble, what would that thought bubble read? I put lunch, hors d'oeuvres, okay. And if the kayaker had a thought bubble, what would that thought bubble read? My selection was mommy. All right, so here's another image that tells a story and teaches a little photographic technique. I was on Mono Lake. This is in California. I was in a kayak, and these strange formations that you see are called tufa formations. And this osprey had created a nest at the top of this tufa formation, and I saw him fly in, fish in talons, bringing that food to his young'uns. And I knew that he was going to alight from the nest at a certain point in time, and I wanted to be ready. So here are the things I did to prepare for that. I positioned my kayak so that the composition was the way that I wanted it to be. Notice that this is a vertical image, not a horizontal image. If I had done horizontal, I might not have captured the osprey's reflection because I may not have had enough space, or the image would have been so small that it wouldn't have been as impactful. So I elected to do a vertical image. I composed the shot so that I would hopefully have enough space for the osprey to fly and catch him in the air, catch the reflection on the ground. I needed to lock my point of focus because I knew that once he alit, I didn't want my camera to make that decision. I had my exposure dialed in, I had my shutter speed set to what I wanted it to be, and I had my frame rate ready to go to take a number of photos all at once. The bird took off and the photo was able to be captured. So there's a lot that goes in preparation, but only if you know certain things that are important to take into consideration beforehand. I'm going to have to go through some of this relatively quickly because I only have 45 minutes. This is a group of rams. Anybody know what a group of rams is called? That's a great one, a football team. The group of rams is called a mob. I don't know why, but that's what they're called. And so I'm going to share with you one of my wildlife techniques for photographing wildlife. One of my secrets is just don't hide. Okay, be out in the open. I guarantee they know you're there. They see you. They smell you. Well before you perhaps see them, and you certainly never smell them. So this group of rams was walking along. This is in Banff, Canada. They were walking along the shoreline. And what I did is I positioned myself about 400 yards up away from them in the direction that they were moving. And I sat out on an open rock. I waited for them to come by. And since I wasn't appearing to be threatening, they just wanted to continue on their way. And they walked by me and afforded me some nice shots. And again, here's another example of composition. My ram is not smack dab in the center, even though he's perhaps the primary focus. He's not right in the center of the screen. He's framed by this tree with this mountain pulling us in, the bright water here, so the composition is important. This is a shot taken with a 600 millimeter lens, almost a portrait shot of that ram. This is one of my favorite memories. This is a Kodiak bear up in Kodiak, Alaska. And I was hired to do some promotional photography for a company called Spirit of Alaska to document what people might see on that journey. And this is one of my favorite images. And I'm going to tell you the story of how this image came to be. First, a little bit about Kodiak bears. A grizzly bear can weigh about 1,100 pounds. It's a big animal. I was on this journey with my wife. My wife's name is Corrine. Some of you may have met her. Corrine, could I ask you to stand up just for a second? She hates this. There's Corrine. Corrine weighs about 100 pounds. Now, I said a grizzly bear can weigh 1,100 pounds, but the bears on Kodiak Island have been isolated there and have grown to an even larger size. And the Kodiak bears can grow to about 2,000 pounds in size. So imagine a bear 20 times the size of my wife, but with claws and teeth. That's what we're looking at here. So we were given the use of a Zodiac. The Zodiac is a rubber boat with a motor on it, and we went out looking for bears. This is actually about 10 p.m. at night, even though it doesn't look like it. The sun doesn't quite completely set. It gets pretty dusky around 2 or 3 in the morning. So we go out looking for bears to photograph. And we see a bear, a grizzly bear, ambling along the shore. And he's actually, I would say, like over there somewhere. And he's ambling along the shore. And I say, okay. And we motor up ahead of the bear, turn off the motor, drop the anchor. We're waiting maybe 30, 40 yards offshore. The bear ambles along the shore. He gets about adjacent to us, and he smells us. I mean, he smelled us a long time ago. But their eyesight is about equivalent to a human being's. It's not great. So he doesn't know what we are, but he smells us in the vicinity, and he decides to investigate. So he ambles down into the water, and there's this giant boulder on the lakeshore, and I'm watching him kind of paw his way into the water on this boulder. And I'm looking through my 1 to 400 millimeter lens that's on a tripod in the Zodiac at the time. And what I'm noticing is these enormous rippling muscles in his shoulders and arms. Now, I'm not sharing this information with Corrine, but I'm noticing nonetheless that this is a very, very powerful animal. He ends up going completely down into the water, and at one point he stands up out of the water, and he's like this, just standing up like a human. The water is cascading off his fur, dripping off his claws, and it's quite an amazing sight. He goes back down into the water and starts swimming like this. He gets to be about 25 feet away from our Zodiac, and Corrine is nudging me and saying, it's time to go. And I'm saying, no, this is what we've come here for. And I'm frantically taking photos, photo after photo. At about 15 feet away, let's get to that shot. This is about 15 feet away. The bear can now see us clearly. He knows that we are not his normal prey, and he turns around and he goes on his way. Now, I'm now much older and wiser, and I look back and reflect upon the decisions that I made that day, and it was pretty foolish because the 4 to 6 inch claws of the Zodiac and the rubber boat that we were in are not a compatible match, and we could have been in trouble had he been really ravenous at the time. Now, this is the original image that I shot, just to show you that it was quite dusky, and I was able to reclaim a lot of the color in Photoshop. And I also intentionally underexposed this shot by 2 stops. Who can tell me why? Say a little louder, sir. Shout it out. I can manipulate it later, but what does shooting 2 stops? No? No? 2 stops does what to our shutter speed? If we lower the light, we increase our shutter speed. So I was able to shoot at a higher shutter speed because I wanted to have this crisp image in the shot. Okay, 1903. Orville and Wilbur Wright create the first human-powered flight in an airplane. What date did I say? 1903? 1969, a mere 66 years later, this image was taken. Humans set foot on the moon. Wrap your brain around that just for a moment. In the vast history of humankind, our evolution from the chariot to the horse to a wagon to a boat to a plane made of wood and canvas, and in 66 years our technology had progressed to the point where we could put humans on the moon, and that's pretty amazing, pretty incredible to think about that very short span of time. Neil Armstrong was the first person on the moon. Who was the second? Buzz, thank you. Apollo 11, the Hubble telescope is provided us some just absolutely stunning photos. Viking Jupiter, this is Jupiter obviously. Many of you have seen this photo. This is a photo taken by Hubble called the Pillars of Creation. This is a nebula, and a nebula is a stellar nursery where stars are born. Just an amazing, amazing shot. You can imagine that getting time to use the Hubble telescope is like super important, right? They don't waste it. Every second is allocated. So a proposition was put forth to photograph a patch of the sky that apparently had nothing in it. Some black piece of sky. Now, I want you to use your imaginations for a moment, and this is because to me this is so powerful. Think of a dome over our heads, maybe a mile high. Big dome encompassing all of us. And we're going to take a small pin and we're going to stick it somewhere in that dome. That's how small of a piece of the sky the Hubble was taking a photograph of. And they hoped that there would be something there, but they didn't know if they would find anything. Now, obviously, the light coming from that area would be so dim, would be so faint, that the exposure would have to be very, very long. So the exposure that Hubble took in this black patch of sky was not for 10 seconds, not for 10 minutes, not for 10 hours, but the exposure lasted for 10 days. And this is the image that was captured. Every point of light you see in this photo is not a star. Every point of light you see in this photo is a galaxy. Now, try to wrap your brain around the thought that if we had that little pin in our dome, how many of those pins could we stick in our dome? Tens of thousands? Millions? Lots, right? And in that little speck in the sky, 3,000 galaxies were seen. The human mind has a hard time comprehending such vastness, but it's certainly interesting to ponder. This is a depiction of a spacecraft called Voyager. And Voyager 1 and 2 were launched in 1977. And they were on a mission, a 5-year mission, to photograph primarily Jupiter and Saturn. And they provided us with just a wealth of information. Here's a picture of Jupiter and some of its moons. And the moons of Jupiter are pretty fascinating. This is a picture of one of Jupiter's moons. It's called Io. And Io has active volcanoes. It has lakes of molten lava. And this photo actually captures a volcano or an active eruption at the time. Perhaps even more interesting is this moon here called Europa, called the ice planet, or not planet, but ice moon. Europa is thought to have subsurface oceans of liquid water. Everywhere in the universe, well, at least on Earth, that we have found water, we have found life. I have been scuba diving in the Galapagos Islands near volcanic vents where the water is toxic if you were to drink it, but I see life proliferating in those areas. Voyager is traveling at just incredible speeds today, about 8 to 10 miles per second. And at that incredible speed, it will take Voyager 40,000 years to reach the nearest star. Now, that's not the farthest star in our galaxy. That's the nearest star, 40,000 years. Voyager would send photos back. You can see the dish here in this photo. They would send photos back via this dish, and it would take a very long time to send those photos back. In fact, the memory in your smartphone in your pocket right now has 200,000 times the capacity of the memory that existed on Voyager. Pretty crazy. 44 years later, even though this mission was designed to last only 5 years, 44 years later, Voyager is still functioning and being an ambassador to the human species as it goes out and is now in interstellar space. It entered interstellar space in 2012. Before Voyager departed, Carl Sagan, a man who I admire, had an idea to turn Voyager around one last time and take a photograph of planet Earth. And so this request was granted, and this is the image that was captured. And what you see here, this tiny particle of dust, is planet Earth. And this image is not as dramatic as the pillars of creation. It's not as dramatic as some of the photos of Jupiter. But to me, it is extremely thought-provoking. So I'd like to dedicate the next part of my presentation to the amazing Carl Sagan, because he termed that image that we saw the pale blue dot. Scientists estimate that there are about 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. We live in a galaxy called the Milky Way. The Milky Way is composed of over 100 billion stars. Along one of the spiral arms of the Milky Way resides a rather unremarkable planet. And that planet revolves around a star, our sun. That planet is the Earth. It's our home. Everyone you know, everyone you love, every human being that has ever existed has lived out their lives there. All the joys and suffering, all of the confident religions and ideologies, every teacher of moral wisdom, every corrupt politician, every poet, philosopher, explorer, and inventor, every young couple in love, mother and father, and hopeful child, every supreme leader and every lowly peasant, every saint and every sinner in the history of our species has resided there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. As we look back on this distant image of the Earth, it is interesting to know that the Earth is the only place known thus far to harbor life. And it brings into focus that our home, the Earth, is a tiny, fragile speck in a vast cosmic ocean. And it underscores our responsibility to cherish and preserve the only place we can call home, that pale blue dot. Thank you very much. So we will have another lecture coming up. You'll just have to check the Viking Daily for when that will be. Thank you all so much for attending. I hope to see you at the next lecture.